But I just think that he's in a really good spot and he's going to break out. He absolutely was my wide receiver one last year. And, it's easy to say you would take Puka Nacua over him now, but if I was redrafting that season, he would be at worst my second. He has to look at Lamar and figure out how to not take a big hit. He needs to do stuff like that and he'll be just fine. He didn't have Jonathan Taylor for any of his starts, which is a massive upgrade for him.
Boomer Bust Squad, we are back talking about breakout players. We're going to get right into it, and we are going to talk about Anthony Richardson. This is one of Bryce's guys that he thinks is going to break out in 2024. We saw it, just little short glimpses. He couldn't stay healthy in his games last year. I think we're all hoping that he stays healthy because it was kind of fun to watch for that little bit that we got to see. So what are you thinking, Bryce?
Yeah, I mean, this is an easy one, right? When a young dual threat quarterback gets hurt, and then in the limited amount of time we did get to see him, he was exciting, and that was without Jonathan Taylor. So when you add that 1-2 punch, that just, I think that puts their touchdown upside through the roof. I mean, the Colts were scoring a lot of points this last year, so their offense can move the ball, their offense can score, and when you put Jonathan Taylor and Anthony Richardson back there, I think it just makes it all the better. He's a super easy guy to put in this category. The Colts do have to make sure they sign Michael Pittman Jr. back to that squad because he's a pivotal part of that passing game for him. And if they do miss him, they got to do anything and everything to make sure they do still surround him with talent at the wide receiver position. But yeah, when you get this guy out there, he can make plays. The only thing is he's got to learn, or they got to teach him to learn how to protect himself. That's getting out of bounds. That's sliding. He's not in college anymore when he's bigger than all the linebackers. Now the linebackers are basically the same size as him. So if he can get those things shored up, which we've seen a lot of dual threat quarterbacks do when they come into the league, especially these big guys, they try and truck all these linebackers, and that wears on you a lot quicker in the pros than it does college. Anthony Richardson could be easily a top 5 fantasy QB producer every year. What are your thoughts, Sully? You put him in that same category, you got him maybe a little bit lower.
Yeah, like we got to see, like you said, glimpses of him, right? And I think we got 2 full games out of Anthony Richardson. He averaged 27.5 fantasy points in 4-point per passing touchdown leagues. I don't really see a whole lot of stuff that I'm concerned about other than what you alluded to and his mindset playing the pro game. Like he has to figure out a way to get down. He has to look at Lamar and figure out how to not take a big hit. He needs to do stuff like that and he'll be just fine. He didn't have Jonathan Taylor for any of his starts, which is a massive upgrade for him. And he's got 2 pretty good young receivers in Michael Pittman Jr. and I'm a big Josh Downs guys too. So I think I don't really see a way health-wise that he doesn't break out and become a fixture inside of our top 12 for the next little while. I think that he's got everything in terms of talent and tools. He just needs experience, right? Like the big knock on him was just didn't play a lot. Like he didn't play a lot in Florida either. So I think he's got everything that we need him to do to be that guy. And of all the players that we talk about today, to me, he's the safest one of them all.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I was very, very surprised. I'm pretty sure, wasn't it the Jags that they opened up with in I thought he looked better in that game than Trevor Lawrence did. And I'm pretty sure it was their first game, his first start. But I was very surprised with how good of a passer he was in the decision-making and how on target he was with his passes. Obviously, with these guys, these type of guys, you're going to see some erratic passes here. It doesn't matter if it's Jalen Hurts or Lamar or Josh Allen or Justin Fields or any of these guys that are just as lethal running the ball as they are passing. So it was real nice to just see his decision-making and everything. Again, to reiterate what you guys said, it's now just learn how to protect yourself and use the running when you need to, but make sure you protect the ball and protect yourself. And as long as he can stay healthy, I mean, the fantasy upside is immense. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we see an Anthony Richardson number 1 quarterback overall during a season because of that rushing ability. I mean, I think he's got every bit as much as Justin Fields does. And we saw him just about break the record in the 2022 season. So if you get a year like that in a full healthy season with the way that offense worked with Minshew at quarterback, there could be huge upside with Anthony Richardson. And that's the fun part about him is we really don't know yet. We haven't seen it, but you got those real short glimpses of what could be a real fun fantasy producer.
Yeah, and that was the big knock I had on him coming out is I was skeptical of his ability to be an accurate passer. And in the limited, and the jury's still out on that. 4 games is a really small sample size in the NFL because it takes a lot for teams to get film on you and start to figure out some of your tendencies. So he's still gonna have to prove that for me. But with the rushing upside, fantasy wise, he's a huge asset. A guy coming out of college that was known for his pinpoint passing and maybe like the accuracy was a guy that really disappointed this year, probably the most out of the young quarterbacks, and that's Bryce Young. I'm giving him a mulligan on this season. I mean, he landed in probably the worst spot of all the rookie quarterbacks, which makes sense. He was the first overall taken. The Panthers did trade up, but the weapon when you have DJ Chark Jr. and Adam Thielen as your first 2 options with real Tommy Tremble, I think, is the best tight end. Those aren't ideal. Running backs with Chuba Hubbard and Miles Sanders not having strong years as well. Just an overall terrible offense. That's not good help for a young quarterback like that. So they bring in a new offensive-minded coach, I believe, that hopefully can turn things around for Bryce Young. So I look for him to, he can't possibly have a sophomore slump after that first season, but I'm gonna give him a chance to prove himself. It seemed like he stayed pretty poised when it came to his mental focus in the game. It didn't look like he let these performances, maybe at least it didn't seem that way, that it didn't let him like maybe get to him mentally. He stuck in the whole year and played the whole year. So hopefully this upcoming year he gets significantly better because I think he's got the raw talent to be a decent quarterback. But again, he is pretty small, and there's very few successful small quarterbacks in the history of the NFL. So I know you're a Bryce Young quote unquote hater is what I'll call it. So
Sure.
do you think he gets worse, or do you just think he just stays the same?
I think he is who he is. I think he's a complimentary secondary backup type quarterback. I don't see him as a starting quarterback in the NFL. He showed me nothing last season that would change my mind. Andy Dalton started 1 game and had a statistically better game than any game that Bryce Young had all season with that same shitty offensive line, aging wide receiver core, garbage tight ends, crazy ownership, lackluster coaching. So I get it. Dalton's a seasoned veteran and Bryce Young's a rookie. And will he get better? I'm sure he will. Will that team get better? Yes, he will. Is he a guy that I want to target to have on any of my fantasy rosters? Absolutely not. I had 1 share. Hey, like I said before, he was my top rated quarterback coming out. I'm not sitting here saying I never thought he was good. I thought he was going to be just fine. Made him my top ranked quarterback. Had a couple of shares. I moved off them. And I'm happy that I moved off them. I do not see it as a situation that I'm going to regret. And I'm wrong a lot, and I could be wrong here, but no, there needs to be a glimpse of something for me in a player, and there was nothing. So I'm out.
But you hold on to that Kyle Pitts love though after 4 years. But Bryce Young
But I'll
loses it
also
after
say
half a
that
season.
sure, but was I wrong about Kyle Pitts? 100%. Does Kyle Pitts still have the ability to do it? Yeah, but until he does, he hasn't. And yeah, like I said last week, I wear that as a tattoo, and it's not a badge of honor. It is what it is.
Yeah, my only thing is when you bring in a rookie, you trade away your number 1 weapon.
Mm-hmm.
You have those aging weapons. For one, we already know it takes time for guys to acclimate to the NFL. And then not only that, but your coach from basically the beginning, who didn't make it a full season, is rumored to be on the firing block from like week 3 on, because the owner is always in the trying to implement himself into everything. And just Carolina they're almost more dysfunctional now than I remember the Browns being.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking about a very dysfunctional franchise there in Cleveland, right? And that situation again, it reminds me of Trevor Lawrence, his rookie season. Obviously, it's not the same situation, but it's just that chaotic, and there's no stability, and there's no like. How do you trust your coach 3 games into your career when the owner's already getting involved with everything. Like, it's just a very dysfunctional situation. I'm not giving up on him yet. Maybe he doesn't have that high end number 1 overall quarterback ceiling that people had hoped for Bryce Young, but I still think that he could be. I don't think he's any worse than a Baker Mayfield, right? And Baker Mayfield was fine if you were starting him in Superflex this year. So I'm not out on him completely. He may end up this offseason, depending on how the whole community feels, as a heavy buy because of that and how cheap he may be. And we know he's still starting at least another year or probably 2 with the new coach. So you've got a little bit of a leeway with him. And if the public feels more like Sully does about him going into 2024, then he could easily end up on one of my top buy lists for Superflex leagues.
Baker Mayfield played for a Cleveland Browns team that was coached by Hugh Jackson that didn't win a game the year before he got there. Took over for Tyrod Taylor when he got hurt and looked like a legit NFL quarterback to the point where people were pretty pumped about him. Bryce Young has done anything that was even remotely resembled what Baker did as a rookie with just as equally as shitty a football team.
Really? Didn't he have Jarvis Landry on that team?
Yeah, what else did he have? Jarvis Landry, Adam Thielen.
Well, he's got. I would take that Jarvis Landry over this. Adam Thielen.
That was
sure, it's a veteran
offensive line. The offensive line wasn't as bad either. That's a huge part that people don't take.
They didn't win a game the year before, so that's all I'm saying.
But once they started building around Baker Mayfield, when they started putting weapons, getting offensive line or run game, what did he do? He took him to the playoffs. I don't think Bryce Young. I'm not saying he's going to do that, but I think that to put all the blame on that team on him is we'll see, because I think the Trevor Lawrence was the perfect.
I'm not putting all the blame on him. I put the blame on that ownership more than anything. But I will say that when I look at these guys and I'm trying to gauge, and I'm not a guru, but when I'm trying to gauge whether I think a guy's going to break out or get better, I need to see some semblance and some flashes of a jumping off point. And I don't see that in Bryce Young. I
saw a couple the last 2 weeks. The last 2 weeks, he actually didn't look too bad. Well, dude, better than the first 2 weeks, right? When you rather see in the last 2 than the first 2, in all reality, means you're probably improving.
I just think it's a lot to ask of him.
I'm going to look at his last. Maybe you might want to say 3 weeks.
There was like 2 games. There was like a game or 2 at the end of the season where Bryce Young actually had a decent amount of yards, some touchdown. Like, he didn't do god awful. And I think the Trevor Lawrence example is perfect.
He had 2 good fantasy games. One of them was the third last week of the season where he threw for 312 and 2 against the Packers. He followed it up with 112 and nothing and 94 and nothing, and then shut out the last 2 weeks of the season. So if you want to look at the last 2 weeks of the year, 100% agree.
Okay, it was the third to last week then. I knew there was
one. He had 2 good games this year, and he didn't quite get to Andy Dalton level, but hey.
I mean, that's not even, for me, that's not even a fair thing to say.
Deshaun Watson didn't have a better game than Joe Flacco's best game. Would you want to move forward with Joe Flacco over Deshaun Watson? I don't think I would.
Well, if you look at Adam Thielen's targets in the first couple of weeks of the seasons, he was a ghost in that offense. And then Andy Dalton gets a start in week 3 and he gets peppered. And then all of a sudden, Bryce Young goes, hey, maybe I should throw the ball to this guy. So I don't know. Like I said, could be wrong.
That's also a one Dalton game and then other games where you may not have had. I don't know what defenses they played, but there's just a lot more that goes into it than just what the box score says. Is sure. My whole thing. That's what's. I think a lot of people just look at the box scores. They see that. I've seen it in Chicago. I mean, we are accustomed to this type of thing with our quarterbacks. So there's just with all the dysfunction. I'm not saying go out and spend first pick on them, or that I would pay as much as the first 3 quarterbacks in the 2024 class, but I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility for him to be good enough to be a top 15, 16 quarterback with a little bit more upside. It's just, Baker started out really good, but then he went to shit and nobody wanted him. And he bounced around
he broke in half and played injured, but yes, you're not wrong. He definitely declined.
But I mean, he was still a guy that played for 4 teams and couldn't even stick with the Panthers that needed a
True.
quarterback as bad as anybody else. So
Hey,
Pretty solid
he had a
organization, apparently.
he had a good
Right,
year.
so-
Baker Mayfield had a good year, and that's who Carolina's coach is now, is the guy that was leading that offense.
I think
So.
that's a good point, right? Like Canales, for all intents and purposes, looks like he's the one who resurrected Baker. So can he resurrect Bryce Young? Perhaps he can. If anybody can, maybe he can. But he better do it in 8 or 9 weeks, or he's going to be see you later. Bye.
Well, that's
So,
the biggest thing. That's my biggest worry with Bryce.
Right.
Is that they're going to have
100%.
a different coach every year. So I don't disagree with that part. But
it's system too, right?
System, just the situation, and Tepper is going to have to realize, like, I need to get out of the way sometimes. Like, this is not going to work. He's got to have football guys in his ear saying, you're making it harder for everybody right now, not giving a coach a chance to build a culture. And that's why in Chicago, I was happy that they kept Eberflus, right? You keep that momentum going that you were building, even if it was really only on defense. You keep that going, you give your team a shot, and you build that culture. It's not everybody's going to come in, whether it's a quarterback, whether it's a coach, receiver, any other position, and immediately be really, really good. And I think that's what people expect too much of from not just Bryce Young, but just young players in general. You see, receivers that don't have the 1,300-yard rookie year, and they went ahead of the guy that had it, and people just think, oh, well, that guy's automatically better. And I don't think it's quite that simple. But also, I'm not going to die on this sword either. I'm not either. Beating the
I think
top
16 is good.
Young,
you guys can you guys can go and add Bryce Young to your rosters, and I hope he works for you. I just don't want anything to do with him. I got better.
Man, if someone's like real low on him and they'll take a 2nd-round pick for him, I'd
okay. So what would you pay for him? What would you give up for him comfortably? Just for simplicity,
I think when it comes to like a 1st-round pick, it would definitely have to be in the back quarter, and that could also depend on what my team looks like. Like if you're really desperate for a quarterback too, I would definitely rather have Bryce Young than Michael Penix Jr. or probably Bo Nix. So I would trade of late 1st if I needed one. But any 2nd in a heartbeat, I would trade for Bryce Young for sure.
Yeah, right now I would be around the 110. I have 9 guys that I would probably have ahead of him, and then there's a group that could jump him during this whole process. Yeah. I just posted it in our Facebook group the other day that guys like, if JJ McCarthy goes top 15, then he's probably going to be up in that 110, 1-9 range for me. Bo Nix, if he jumps up after his Senior Bowl week, then he could jump into that conversation for that back, top 10, 11 guys. We've got other receivers, the Franklins and Thomas Juniors and Mitchells, that I think could end up getting into that range. This class is just freaking awesome. So I would be with you potentially 110 to 112 or any 2nd at this point, but it could end up being like the 2-4 and back, depending on how those guys I mentioned work out. And you've also got the receiver from Michigan, another guy that didn't get a lot of action because they didn't throw a lot, but just looks.
You got a lot of Senior Bowl love for sure.
Roman Wilson.
Yes.
He's pretty small too. That's another knock on him, but he's a great route runner.
There are a lot of guys there that could end up being ahead of where I would have Bryce, but I think a 2nd-round pick for a quarterback that we know is going to get probably at least 2 more years to start is an option I'll take. I mean, I don't think he's Zach Wilson. I just don't think he is. I think he's better than that. He doesn't have nearly the weapons that Zach Wilson had, and he couldn't figure it out. And maybe Bryce doesn't figure it out, but for a 2nd-round pick a year after a guy went 1 overall in the NFL draft, I'll risk that every day.
I would move a 2nd for him, just because I know there's people out there that would still move a 1st, but I don't want anything to do with him because I do think he has a year left as a starting quarterback, if not even the full season.
Minimum. Right. Yeah.
We'll see.
Okay,
I don't know if he makes it through next year.
Well, okay, so we go from a disappointing season in Bryce Young to more of like a little nice surprise in Will Levis. I was kind of high on Will Levis in the offseason last year. I thought he had all the tools. I just thought he played in a tough division in the SEC with like really not so great weapons. And that hurt him because he did fall into day 2 and he wasn't really expected to. And he gets the opportunity to start last year, and he, nonetheless balled out in his first game. I think he threw 4 touchdown passes. DeAndre Hopkins had his first good game of the year, so it got fans excited. And things did simmer down a little bit. He's definitely got a learning curve to him, but the guy's built, pretty similar to Anthony Richardson. I mean, he's a big quarterback that's like built like a middle linebacker. And again, I think he needs to. He didn't get severely injured to miss a whole season or even partial like Anthony Richardson did, but he was trying to run over guys and he got banged up, and we saw Ryan Tannehill see the field again at the end of the year. I don't know exactly how I feel about Will Levis yet. I think I just need more data. So that's more, and that's more playing time. But I think he's got all the tools. He's got the arm strength to be a good NFL quarterback. I just don't know what his rushing upside when it comes to fantasy is, because like he'd had games where he'd just take off and he'd look pretty good, and then there'd be games where he didn't run too much. So what are maybe some of your thoughts on Will Levis as a breakout candidate? He's an easy candidate, right? Because he's a rookie quarterback that is going to start next year. It's pretty evident that they're going to move forward with him, ideally getting him some wide receiver help in that department. So do you think he could break out and be a QB1 in your fantasy roster? Or do you maybe see his like ceiling more as like a higher end QB2? What do you think, Rick?
I would be more on the back end QB2. I'm not a big Will Levis guy. I don't think that he's got the staying power. I would more compare him to somebody like Sam Howell, who can sling it around and throw it, but probably isn't going to hold down a starting job in the NFL for a long period of time. More of a stopgap until Tennessee does figure out that franchise quarterback, if they ever do. I mean, again, I'm in Chicago. I know that some teams never figure that out. So, I don't know.
We haven't really figured it out either.
Kirk Cousins is way better than any quarterback we've ever
sure,
had
but he's
statistically.
He's probably gone, so that's all it is.
Yeah, like, I mean, again, he's a guy, he's probably going to turn the ball over quite a bit. He's probably going to put up yards and if they have weapons, probably some touchdowns, but how long is he going to be a starter in the NFL? That's my biggest concern. So yeah, he may break out just simply based on volume and having that job for a year, but I don't know that I wouldn't automatically have him on the trade block if we're in week 5 and he's a top 10 quarterback, top 12 quarterback, he's probably on my trade block unless I absolutely need him for a run.
Yeah. I think if Bryce Young deserves to be on this list, Will Levis does as well, because they both play behind a terrible offensive line. They both played with very extremely limited receiving weapons. They both played with questionable play calling. And I'll go back to what I said before. Will Levis showed me some stuff as, man, this guy's got a big arm. He's got some mobility. He's tough as nails. I can remember that one game where he goes across the middle and just trucks some linebacker and gets right up. And I'm like, he's got the moxie. Like, he's got some stuff there. But he also fell in the draft where he fell because he's got some limitations as well. But if, it's Callahan, I think, is their coach who comes from Cincinnati. If he brings T. Higgins with him, I probably like Will Levis a little bit more. Or if he brings a Joe Mixon, or he brought his father in already, who's a renowned guru of the offensive line that just left the Browns. So I think there's a lot more positives in Tennessee going forward than there are in Carolina. So I just kind of thought Will Levis and Bryce Young kind of go hand in hand, both rookie quarterbacks, both in struggling situations. I would much rather gamble based on cost on Will Levis than Bryce Young. I'd be happy to move Bryce Young in a trade that brought me back Will Levis. I think Will Levis can be, to your original question, Bryce, a solid number 2 quarterback for my fantasy teams. I don't think he's going to be he's not going to be Ben Roethlisberger, right? And Will Levis doesn't run a ton. He can move, but I don't think he's going to get me anything with his legs in terms of fantasy points. I think he ran for less than 100 yards this season. So I like him. I think he's got some upside, and I think he can break into that solid mid QB2 range, but that's probably his ceiling.
Yeah, I worry about him.
Well, I just wanted to hit on the point. You said something about Titans and Panthers, like skill players. being similar, and I would highly disagree. I think he's got 2 better running backs in the backfield in Tennessee. I would take Tyjae Spears over Chuba Hubbard or Miles Sanders, and obviously
That's a good
Derrick
point.
Henry.
I'll give you that.
Hopkins would clearly be the first receiver that I would take out of those 2 teams.
I don't know, dude. Not anymore.
I mean, I would definitely take him over Adam Thielen, and who else am I going to take? And then I would probably take Chig out of everybody else.
Yeah, I don't think Hopkins had a down year based on talent or getting old. I think it was just quarterback play. I mean, that's a rookie.
I do agree about
quarterback
the
thrown
line, but when we're talking about
The
the skill
lines
position
were
players, I
terrible.
would say there was a lot more talent in the skill position for Tennessee. So that's the only thing I wanted to say there. I just don't think those ones are very comparable, especially with the run game and having Derrick Henry. That should be like a young quarterback's best friend.
You're right. D-Hop still had a 1,000-yard season last year, so I'll give you that.
Yeah,
I didn't realize it was that good.
He didn't really get it moving until the end of once Will Levis took over too.
About second half of the season, yeah.
Yeah. But what you said about Will Levis as being like a stopgap quarterback, and you guys might agree, is how I feel about this last quarterback, Aiden O'Connell. Obviously for the same reason we put Will Levis and I guess Bryce Young in this list is, they just had a rookie year, and as it appears right now at the recording of this show, he looks to be the quarterback for the Raiders moving into next season. We still have a lot of offseason, basically the whole offseason to happen in the draft, of course, that could change. But as of right now, going into this starting role, he definitely is a breakout candidate nonetheless, especially if Devontae Adams stays there, because that is a nice receiving core with him and Myers, and a good young tight end in Michael Mayer that started to kind of show some bits and pieces kind of more towards the back half of the season. Maybe he can get more involved this upcoming season. So I mean, I really don't have much to say because you said it all about Will Levis that I would say about Aiden O'Connell. And I think you're probably going to agree with me that maybe he's just a guy that can hopefully give you some quarterback 2 numbers if you're real desperate in that position. Maybe a guy you feel okay plugging in for your bye weeks or trading away for something. But I don't really see his ceiling very high. He's got really little to no rushing upside, just got some solid weapons at the receiving core. So if he can hold on to the job, any starting quarterback is serviceable in fantasy value moving forward. So do you think, is there anything else? Do you disagree, or is there anything else that I'm missing here on Farva, Rick?
No, I would actually say him and, I agree that him and Levis are kind of in the same situation, right? O'Connell can put up some numbers. He's probably not going to be a long-term starter, but I would say the cost to acquire Aiden O'Connell is probably half of what it is to get Will Levis, right? So Everybody expects the Raiders to either trade for Justin Fields, sign a free agent quarterback, or move up in the draft to draft one. But coming out of Las Vegas, there's a lot of talk that the Raiders really like O'Connell. Again, was a young guy drafted later. And, if he gets the opportunity to start there, then for a 3rd round rookie pick, maybe even further back, depending on how lengthened this class gets, you could get a guy that starts for you. And even if he starts for 1 year, that's worth a 3rd round pick to me. And by a breakout would be, even a top, 18 quarterback for super flex leagues. I feel like would be a breakout for O'Connell where he was drafted. Obviously did get a few starts, but nobody expects him to go for them next year. So I'll risk a 3rd rounder for that. Even if it only ends up being my 3rd super flex starter and I plug him in for 2 or 3 weeks, I'll be happy for that. If he gets me, 15 points a week in the weeks he has to start. And then maybe he loses his job and maybe I hold him until he ends up getting a chance because the starter goes down or something. So that's where I'm at. That's where I think the difference is between him and the rest of these quarterbacks in here, and a lot of other quarterbacks that we could talk about. When it comes to super flex, most quarterbacks that are going to get a chance to start are probably going to cost you at least a high to mid 2nd round pick. O'Connell's probably not going to cost you that because there's very little confidence in him remaining the Raiders starter for a long period of time. So I'll take those spot starts and maybe a season of O'Connell for a 3rd rounder where most of my third rounders are never going to end up in my lineup to begin with.
I really don't have much to add other than on the outside of the Raiders organization looking in, it seems to me that they're kind of sort of figuring out that they're trying to fix the culture before the product on the field, right? Like Gruden was a bit of a disaster, and Josh McDaniels, apparently everybody hated him, including all the coaches and all the players and everyone
Yep.
else. And then once they got rid of him and they got the current head coach, and they were kind of like, guys like Max Crosby come out during the coaching interviews and says, like, he's our coach. I'm out of here, basically, if he's not going to be our coach. And then they're like, Max Crosby's pretty good. We should probably give this guy the job. But
Right.
I think Aiden O'Connell is a serviceable quarterback, and I like him. He's the kind of guy that looks like he'll go to the wall for his team, and all indications are the players like him as well. He's nothing flashy. He's nothing terrible. I'm trying to think of a comp, and I can't. Just like a really good backup quarterback that just happens to be a starter right now, and I think Rick's bang on. You can get him for a third. I could
What about like a
sit here
Jacoby
for
Brissett?
Yeah, but just not a mobile one, right? Like I'm trying to think of what guy I
guess so.
can't. Like I don't know, but
He's
I
like
have a
Teddy Bridgewater.
I was gonna say like a nudge below, I don't know. Maybe Bridgewater might be an all right comp, but Bridgewater did run before he got hurt, right? Like he ran a little bit before he tore his leg up.
Once he put the second glove on, it was kind of it for Teddy. But
Teddy two gloves.
Teddy two gloves. But no, I just think he's good enough. Like, and I think I have two ways of looking at it. If I want to go get myself a share of O'Connell, I'm going to do it now for a third, like Rick said, because I think you'd do it. But if I have O'Connell, I'm carrying him into the season, because in the season, you might get a late first for him, depending on the team that needs a quarterback, gets desperate. We just saw like 45 different quarterbacks start this last season, or I think the number was even higher, right? So
yeah, that's crazy.
He's okay. He's not bad, and they would do themselves well to just kind of work with him and build with him. What ultimately got McDaniels fired, I believe, is when he started Hoyer over O'Connell, and it's like, what possibly good can come of that? So anyway, I like him. I think he's okay. He's not going to win you anything, but he's not going to cost you a ton, and he's not going to hurt you. He's a good number 2, ideally number 3 quarterback for you on your Superflex roster.
Yeah, definitely number 3, because I don't know that he may not even start the whole next year. But again, third round picks, like they don't
You're right.
come out
Like,
very often, and
they could end up with Cousins and Fields by the time we finish this show. Like, we don't know, right? Like, who knows?
Yep.
Well, not Cousins, because they can't sign him yet, but you know what I mean.
Right.
Well, the good thing about a serviceable QB that's not too flashy and still young is that an offense has to run or has to have an established run game to give that guy some help, which kind of leads us into our next guy at the running back position in Zamir White. And we got, again, this is a guy we got a little glimpse of at the end of the year with Josh Jacobs hurt. Zamir White was pretty efficient, and I believe in like maybe 1 or 2 of those games, he was pretty decent in the pass catching department as well. I know there was one game he had like 140 rushing yards, and then there was another game that he might have had like 5 or 6 receptions. And if I'm not mistaken, Aiden O'Connell was the quarterback, so that could be a nice little connection we get next year with some dump offs for him. But the Raiders, I mean, the past 3-4 years have used and abused any running back that's sitting back there, and whoever's sitting back there, they don't share, because when Josh Jacobs is healthy, we didn't know who Zamir White or where he was. But when Josh Jacobs was down, Zamir White is getting that exact same workload transferred right over to him, and it looked like he handled it pretty well. This is one of the more exciting breakout candidates for me personally, because I do have a ton of shares in Zamir White. I drafted him probably in the 3rd round in rookie drafts the year he came out a couple years ago, and just held on to him in hopes that Josh Jacobs didn't get tagged last year, and hoping that the Raiders move on from him again this year. It makes sense to move on from a running back when you're obviously going to be in at worst, a soft rebuild as an organization. So obviously, I think we can all agree that if he gets the same workload Josh Jacobs was getting, it's good for him in fantasy terms. Maybe not in length of career, as we're seeing with Josh Jacobs, but you get 25 plus touches a week, mostly on the ground and maybe some there in the air. He's a huge asset. Is there anything that you think that Zamir White can't do that Josh Jacobs can? I mean, like they seem like kind of the same type of running back. So I really expect them to be or expect Zamir White's value to be very similar to what Josh Jacobs was in that offense. Outside of that crazy year, but moving forward, I think you could pay you should be charging a pretty good premium on a guy like that when you expect that same usage.
I'm trying to think of what I think. I like the player. I liked what I saw. I kind of have sticker shock on these guys right now, and totally different player and totally different situation. But I just keep thinking of like Tony Pollard, and I think about these guys that are in these secondary roles that get these limited exposures and they're incredibly efficient, and then they get to be the guy, and all of a sudden formations
Maybe
on
you
defense are
maybe
different.
you
They're
should think
keying
more
on you
of
differently.
Ramondre Stevenson.
Okay, how's that?
Maybe you
How's
should
that
think.
looking now?
What do you mean? Ramondre was. I mean, the offense was bad this last year, but Ramondre is still a
Yeah,
good
I
fantasy
like
asset.
Zamir White. But are there things that Josh Jacobs can do that he can't? Yes. Josh Jacobs is an exceptional running back and a way better running back and a better pass catcher and probably a better pass blocker. But that
Damn,
doesn't
pass
diminish the
catcher.
fact that Zamir White is a good running back, and I think he has a good. He's going to be in a good spot in this offense. I just have a little bit of a concern for when the lights go on bright and these secondary guys become the guy. It's usually a lot different, and their efficiency drops. And like White had what 3 games at the end of the year where he looked unbelievable. Like he's had 121 career carries coming into last season, and he didn't do much of anything with it because Josh Jacobs was there most of the time, and the only time he really got to play is when Jacobs was banged up. I think the Raiders are done with Jacobs. I think Jacobs is done with the Raiders. It's logical, to your point, if they're building with Zamir White. That offensive line was way better than I thought it would be last season, and I think he has a role there. He might be a guy that's more on my sell list than my buy list, but in terms of breakout, 100% he should be on this list, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. He would be on my sell list as well. I'm not confident, and this is the problem for these fringe running backs this year, is that there are a ton of fringe running backs that are going to go 3rd, 4th, 5th round that I think can compete with guys like Zamir White. You asked what can Jacobs do that White can't? And one thing is lead the NFL in rushing, because I don't see that happening in Zamir White's career. But yeah, I think with the way this draft is going to work out, we may not see a running back in the first 2 rounds. So
Yeah.
teams are going to be scooping them up 3rd, 4th, 5th round, and you just get one guy like Zamir White into that backfield again. Then it could turn into a 50-50 split. It could turn into White being on the end of a 30% split or worse. Now, the thing that I will say, and this goes for, O'Connell that we just talked about as well, the Raiders did what a lot of teams don't do, and that's when they hire an interim head coach after firing their head coach during the season, retaining that person the following year, right? We've seen Tepper mess that up with Wilkes, right? Wilkes and Pierce were kind of the same thing a year apart for different franchises.
Yeah, and the Raiders screwed it up whenever Dasachi or whatever his name was should have been the coach, right?
So now, if you got to think that White and O'Connell helped Pierce with the way they played at the end of the year, and turning that around a little bit at the end of the year. So Pierce probably has a little bit of loyalty to these guys, and if he's really the players coach, then he may say, hey, we've got these 2 guys, let's concentrate on everything else that we need. So there are positives to go with the negatives that I was speaking of with all the 3rd, 4th round running backs I think we're going to see. So there are 2 sides to the coin. So I could definitely see him being the guy for a year. But again, I don't know that he's long-term, but a breakout in 2024, I definitely can see.
Yeah. Offensive coordinator change there too, right? Like Getsy is just kind of a puzzling hire. But also a guy who's shown he likes to use multiple backs is kind of where I'm going with it.
Well, that and the point that their running game was really good, and they're not going to get the yards from O'Connell. The Bears running backs were still some of the most efficient in the league, even though they were 1st and 2nd in the league in rushing the past 2 years. And a big portion of that is, I guess Fields would have had like 1,700 yards or whatever the last two seasons. But the running backs have still been very, very productive outside of David Montgomery in 2022. So that running game works. It's weird calls in the passing game that
Yeah,
is the real question with Getsy. So
yeah,
so I do agree. I do agree with you there, though. So
Yeah. This last season, just a little statistic. I mean, last year, Josh Jacobs was obviously pretty disappointing, I think, to most owners. And, he had 13 games started and played, and he only had 2 games above 100 rushing yards, where Zamir White had 4 and also had 2 games above 100 rushing yards. I'm not saying he'll lead the league ever, but.
Quick question: were those 2 games before or after McDaniels got fired for Jacobson?
I don't know, but I mean, I wouldn't say usage was the problem. I wouldn't say that, because I mean,
I think give a shit. I think give a shit was a problem, is what I'm saying. Like, I think that whole team quit.
Well, you're a professional athlete. You shouldn't just. I mean, I don't know. I just can't imagine going on.
You're not wrong, Bryce. You're not wrong, but you're also a
Yeah.
human being, and when
Right.
your life is consisted of being a nail and your head coach is a hammer, or you're a pinata, it gets a little tiring after a while. So
When do we know when McDaniels got fired? He's probably
like
late.
week 6, I think. No, it was pretty early. I thought it was like
Then
week 6 or 7.
Then both of his games were with Antonio Pierce above 100 rushing yards, but even then, I mean, he had
defense you're playing matters. The game script matters for all that, right? We can say, oh yeah, he got Zamir matched him with 100-yard games, but it
just like my Andy Dalton, Bryce Young thing is, I can cherry pick the numbers to make my point just like anybody else, right?
I mean, he played some soft defense. The funny thing is his 100-yard games are against some of the better defenses, and then the softer defenses against the run.
Well, he had a big game against KC that everybody can run on, and you'll probably see that in the Super Bowl. Zamir White ran all over Kansas City. I think he ran almost for 150 yards, and that's the game where he had 5 or 6 catches too. So you can run on the Chiefs. Baltimore didn't figure that out, but you can. But yeah, like to Rick's point, who knows? Like, I can't sit here and tell you which defensive guy was healthy that week, or what guy might have missed a game or got hurt in game.
The other one was against
the
Denver,
game script was like
running water when it comes to
but
running.
Zamir White's a good running back. Don't get me wrong. And you don't see a ton of these guys that are later round picks 5 years ago materialize, but today's NFL, a 3rd and a 4th and a 5th round, in some situations a 7th round drafted running back, have as much chances being a guy as a 2nd and a 1st round pick, right? Like, there's as many, Isaiah Pacheco's and
True.
guys like that than there are Najee Harris's of the world, right? And one's a 1st rounder, one's a 7th rounder. There's not a whole lot of difference.
It's hard to gauge Zamir White too, especially when the usage of the backup running back was so strange, where they didn't use him at all. And then, like, when Josh Jacobs gets hurt, they literally, I mean, they keep true to what they did, is whoever the starting running back is getting all the touches. So
yeah,
but they were also had Amir Abdullah and
who still wasn't that involved.
Well, no, but I'm saying is that because those are the guys behind, when Zamir White comes in, then they're just bad. I mean, what, Kenyon Drake was there for like a week or 2.
Brandon Bolden was there. I think.
This is strange to see. It's just strange to see Josh Jacobs get 26 carries and like Zamir White literally gets like 1. Like, you would think, like, let's get like a 20 and 5 or something, something. Especially for
McDaniels coming from where he came from, right? But
you know what I mean? Like, just like literally a ghost until there's an injury. It's just unusual. You don't see that.
And you'd think that, man, their backup running back must just be garbage, and then they put him in, and you're like, holy crap, where's this guy been, right? Totally.
He's very similar size, strength to. I don't know about speed. I mean, neither I don't think are known for their speed, but they're very similar in the way they play.
They look very similar. I agree.
They do, yeah. So I just think, when you bring up Tony, Zeke and Tony Pollard are completely different types of running backs with completely different builds. So that's where it's like, I can't compare him to that, to where I think, like, from going from Dameon Harris to Ramondre Stevenson's a good comparison, because, I mean, Ramondre's bigger than Dameon. You're not really changing the size of your running back or the skill set necessarily. Mm-hmm. Ramondre's obviously more skilled, especially in the passing game, but, in the sense of what they can do, I think size is way more important at running back, and I think Tony Pollard showed that this year with his super disappointing fantasy season. Probably the more explosive, and I don't know, I didn't really have this guy on my radar much this year, is Devon Achane. That, speaking of Tony Pollard, is that what we could see next year from Devon Achane? Obviously, I have some concerns because even in his limited role, he seemed pretty fragile. But nonetheless, speed kills the NFL, and man, that dude was starting out at like an astronomically, like, you can't keep that pace, right? The way he was playing and the amount of touchdowns he's scoring and the yards per carry are not something that can be maintained throughout an entire season. But he is explosive and exciting. Do we think that, because Raheem Mostert's a question mark right now, right? I mean, he could retire. He could still, I guess, be back next year. Who knows? He's an older running back. And the Dolphins could be in that boat, but there's a lot of free agent running backs. So they could be one that, gets one and maybe goes at more of a committee next year. Because it seems like that's what McDaniels kind of wants to do, is a 1-2 punch, because he did it with Mostert and Achane when they were out there. Do we see the same thing? Do we see maybe someone slide in as Mostert's role, kind of as more of the goal line touchback guy that goes out there and starts, and Achane's more of the change of pace back that he succeeded as last year? Or do they think maybe that Achane slides up into Mostert's role and then they bring another guy in as a change of pace? I guess my question is, does Achane lead the backfield next year in touches for the Miami Dolphins? What do you guys think?
I think he does if he's healthy. I think health is the thing that you got to worry about with Achane, especially in that offense. With the way they scheme that up, I think as long as he's healthy, he's going to be fine. Now, I don't think he's ever going to be a 15 even probably average touches per game. He's going to have games where he has that, but I would say that he's probably going to average more in the 12 to 13 range at the high end, just because Dolphins are going to want to keep him healthy as well. And until he proves otherwise, I don't think Dolphins can go into the season with the anticipation of Achane being a workhorse in that backfield. So they have to have somebody else, whether it's Mostert, Jeff Wilson. Every running back that they've plugged in, every running back they've plugged in over the past 2 years has been efficient, right? Even what's that? Salvin Ahmed, when he's got the chance, he's been efficient. And
they've always had efficient running backs. I can think all the way back to Ajayi.
Myles Gaskin was a 7th round drafted running back that had his day in the sun there too, right? Like, yeah.
Ajayi was efficient for 2 games, and then everybody, that was like 60%.
Little bit more than that, but not much.
Dude, 2 games, the 200 yard games were like 60% of his production that year. Like, Ajayi was not very good other than 2 games or 3 games in his Dolphins career.
Poor guy didn't have any knees. Give him a break.
Well, no, I mean, dude, they're in the NFL. They're still good, but Ajayi was one of the most overblown running backs I've ever seen in my life. Which you could kind of consider Achane's like in that realm, right? He's had some really good games. Like you said, a 3-game stretch where he averaged over 12 yards per carry. Are you fucking kidding me? Like, that's not real life. That's Madden numbers on
you can't sustain
rookie mode, right? So but again, I mean, it's clear that he's dynamic. It's clear that he's a big play threat. Now we just need to say Achane, same thing as Anthony Richardson. Stay on the freaking field. Get us 10 to 12 touches per game, and he's probably going to be at least a flex for the next couple of years.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that. We talked about Josh Jacobs, and that's who I really see Miami going and getting. I don't know if necessarily Jacobs is fast enough to fit that offense, but I think he's close. I think Devon Achane is freaking awesome. Like, I just pulled up his numbers. He ran the ball 103 times last year. He had 800 rushing yards. He averaged just under 8 yards per attempt. Like, that's mind-boggling, right? Like, I think it was week 1 he didn't play. Week 2 he had 40 fantasy points. Week 3 I think he didn't play or something. And then week 4 he had another 50 fantasy points, and then he got hurt and missed a bunch of times. So clearly, if he's on the field, he has the ability to take the thing into the house every single time he gets the ball in his hands. I also think that McDaniels definitely wants to have more than one running back. But what I like about his offense that's a little bit different than a lot of other teams is he has no problem putting multiple backs on the field at the same time, right? Like, I look at Miami being potentially like Montgomery and Gibbs, like that kind of split but you didn't see Campbell have Montgomery and Gibbs on the field at the same time very much. And when you put both those guys on the field, and then you have Tyreek and Waddle, and defenses are like, oh my God, all these guys can run like the frickin' wind. Like, what do we do? And what do? They create space, get the guy in space the ball, and it game over. So I like him a lot. I think I don't think he's an RB1 because I don't think he's going to A, stay healthy enough, or B, get enough touches to do it. And it's not even durability. It's soft tissue stuff that worries me about him. And that's what kind of knocked him down last year. But he's dynamic. He's absolutely a breakout candidate, a guy I love to have on my roster. I think he was my fourth ranked guy coming out of A&M last year. I really like him. And I think the game is changing where these smaller guys are a little bit more relevant than they were before. So I like him a lot.
Yeah, I think that's a point, and we can talk about this way more in the future. But the NFL, the players are getting smaller. Like they're stronger
and
but,
faster.
You don't have the 350-pound defensive tackle very often anymore, right? They're more like 310 and fast guys. I don't even know like what is Jalen Carter weigh, right? Probably a little bit over 300 pounds. So it is different than it was like in the 90s and 2000s where you had to be big. And now I do agree that wide receivers and running backs, you're seeing some smaller guys because now it's more about speed and they are stronger. Like that's no doubt, but now you can't hit like you could used to. So that all like factors into not needing that huge size, especially if you're going to be used, sparingly as a running back. And I say that like maybe, 10 carries, 8 carries a week, and then 4 to 5 catches. Having that balance as a smaller running back, I think you're going to be able to succeed. And I think we've seen that like slowly happening over the past decade.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the game is always evolving. So Achane's a guy you love. Sully, maybe another guy that's in your team's wheelhouse is Ty Chandler. So, I'll let you. I don't say much about him. I've got a couple of shares of him, and I was excited to see him finally get the opportunity, and it came rather easily for him. I mean, Rick and I both were not Alexander Madison fans going into last season, but the usage nonetheless still gave him some fantasy value. So that made it exciting for when we thought somebody more talented than him, which Ty Chandler is, would get the opportunity that he would seize it. And he did nonetheless. He looked really good in the touches that he got. And I know there was a game that he should have got a lot more touches that I'm sure you remember pretty well. So you got the insight on Ty Chandler. What are your thoughts on him moving into next season? An obvious breakout candidate, of course.
I think so, but I think what's really telling is when you look at the organization and who's in the organization. So the coach is staying, the GM is staying, ownership's obviously the same, offensive coordinator is the same, running back coach is the same. And I'm sitting there all season long watching Alexander Madison run really hard for 1.5 yards before he gets hit and then going another 1/4 of a yard before he falls down. And then as much as I tried to defend him and as much as I was an anti-Cam Akers guy, we saw when Cam Akers started to get some touches that, well, clearly he's better than Alexander Madison. And then they misused Akers, kept feeding Madison. And it wasn't until we really didn't have any other choice that Ty Chandler got the chance to be had. And I was banging the drum for Ty Chandler back in the preseason, saying this is the best running back on our team. And when he finally got the opportunity to play, he looked really good. But I am confident that there's a reason why the organization didn't see what I saw. And for whatever reason that is, we're bringing somebody else in. We're going to mud up that backfield. We might even stick and hang on to Alexander Madison based on what we paid him. I think he's an easy cut and he probably moves on. But nonetheless, Ty Chandler has all the skill set in the world to be a relevant running back. He's never going to be a bell cow. He's never going to take over that backfield and run with it. But he's a guy that can definitely break out into a different tier of fantasy running back. He's not going to be an RB1. He might not even be an RB2, but he's a great guy to have on your team, I think, for a flex role. Guy could still catch some passes and he's pretty dynamic and he can score. So obviously I like him. I'm a Vikings guy, but I wouldn't break the bank to bring Ty Chandler in because I don't think the organization sees him like the fantasy manager sees him.
I think this really depends on what the Vikings are doing, right? If you don't get Cousins, you don't bring Cousins back, there's a very good chance that you're in kind of one of those reposition years, right? They've got
Yeah,
some
yeah,
talent, but the defense has some holes. You've got the receivers. They That may be the reason why Ty Chandler gets the bulk of the work in 2024. Now, if Cousins comes back and they're spending that money on Cousins, they are going to be going for a Super Bowl, and nothing less is good for them. So that could mean bringing in a different back, solidifying that backfield, and muddying it up, like Sully said, for Ty Chandler. So he does have those. He has all the risks, right? Could replace him with another running back. Could draft a running back that's in the same tier as him, which ends up cutting into his workload. Um, or they just may not like him as much as we do because it took forever for them to use him, um, as Sully said. So, but again, a third rounder. What it's not going to cost you more than a third rounder for Ty Chandler right now, right? I couldn't
no,
imagine anybody spending more than that. Again, third rounder, I'll take it. He was the guy that I went and spent all my off-season budget on last year in the leagues where he was available. I literally dumped all my stuff because I thought I definitely thought he should have been playing over Madison. You know that.
yeah.
But yeah. So I just think he has a wide range of outcomes. But if he's even splitting in that backfield, I could see him being a back end running back 2, high running back 3 with, like you said, weekly flex ability there.
Could they muddy it up by bringing Cam Akers back for another year? Probably be pretty cheap.
Depends
Might
on
as
when he's
well.
going to be healthy and back, right? He came back real fast the last time. So does he heal the same way and get back, or does
He
he
tore his
take some
ACL
time?
this time, didn't he?
No, Achilles again. Other
Was
one.
his other Achilles? Oh, geez.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be
That's
tough for
You
him
have
to
a
come
better
back at
chance
this
of
point.
ordering an Uber and finding Cam Akers than you do turning your TV on Sunday next season.
I don't know if I'd say
No,
that.
he'll be on a roster for sure.
Chandler had 8 carries in the first 8 weeks of the season last year. But when I look at his numbers, it's not like all of a sudden he took off either. Like he had 2 games all season with more than 15 carries, 1 game over 20. So there's something there with O'Connell or someone in that organization that doesn't quite trust to give him everything. And I think Rick's right. If Kirk Cousins is our quarterback, we're bringing something in to go for it. And if Kirk Cousins isn't our quarterback, I still think we're drafting somewhere in that third, fourth round range where we found Chandler in the first place. Teams do that every year, right? They get to the latter part of the draft and they seem to add a load up on late round wide receivers and running backs. And I think the Vikings will be no different. So I like him a lot. I just don't think he's going to be a home run as much as I want him to be.
Running backs for NFL teams are going to be, that's what they're going to do, right? They're just going to keep shooting their shot at running backs because they're cheap and they're going to be able to get them in the third, fourth, fifth round. So they're going to bulk it and they're going to say, we're going to go until we hit on one of these guys and they're our dude. So I think that's the danger for all the fringe running backs. Yep, agreed.
And they don't care about the running back position. The NFL has proven that time and time again. They really don't care about the running back position. So just keep adding late round pieces, and it's just even that much easier to replace a guy year over year.
So with Derrick Henry probably departing from the Titans, I'd imagine his days with the Titans are done. That puts a big question mark on that backfield because obviously the Titans have been known now as like, oh man, they utilize the running back position a lot. And Tyjae Spears got a ton of work his rookie year, both on the ground and in the pass game, which is something that Derrick Henry has lacked, which is, I mean, I want to say it's capped his fantasy value, but I mean, he's had a couple of years in the top 5. So nonetheless, we're not going to see, it's going to be a long time, if ever, that we see a running back with the size and speed and skill set that Derrick Henry has coming to the league. So does Tyjae Spears slide in as, I guess, like kind of the same question we have with Ty Chandler? Does he slide in and take over the bulk of the workload, or could the Tennessee Titans be a team that draft a running back that maybe they utilize, in that same kind of tier as him? I mean, from the limited amount I saw Tyjae Spears, and I'll be the first to say I didn't really watch a ton of the Titans last year. But from the box scores and the little amount that I did see, he seemed like he's pretty efficient running back. Is this a guy that we think can take that jump and be maybe a high-end RB2 for your fantasy rosters? Or, I mean, depending on how involved he is in the pass game, could he sneak into that lower tier RB1 area moving into 2024? What are your thoughts, Rick?
I have the same worries about Spears as I have about all these other guys. And his is a little bit different because the coaching staff's different now. Vrabel's not there.
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones that drafted him. I'm always worried about running backs a lot when a new coaching staff comes in. Because if they have a different, scheme, wide zone versus whatever, then that could really hurt Spears if it doesn't fit his skill set, right? So that I don't know about. I do think that he's more skilled than just about anybody on this list of running backs, and would have probably been the number 3 running back in the class last year behind Bijan and Gibbs if it wasn't for the health concerns with his knees. So he's got the talent, but with those concerns, with the new coaches, again, I think he definitely. I don't think Titans are going out and signing a Saquon Barkley or somebody like that, right? It's going to be somebody in the draft. Tyjae Spears is probably going to lead the backfield in touches, but even if it's somebody that comes in and takes 40%, he's probably looking at mid running back 2 to back end running back 2 at the best. So yes, I think he could have a breakout, but unfortunately, if those knees were good, I would have a completely different feel. But I just don't think he's ever going to be the guy that takes the whole workload because of that specifically. And with the new coaching staff, we don't even know if they like him yet or not. And that's the troublesome part in that backfield, in my opinion.
Oh, not a guy I was crazy high on coming out, and maybe it was the knees, maybe it wasn't. It was partially. But I think he's pretty electric. Like, he looks pretty darn good when he's got the ball. It's kind of Achane light kind of thing, and I think that his ability to catch the football is going to benefit him because regardless, and Rick's right, organizational changes, different mindset, different OC, different everything. When it's not your guy, more so in the NFL than any other professional sport, if the guy on the field isn't the guy that you put there, you got to worry about them. But I also think Tennessee isn't going to be very good next year and is going to throw the ball a hell of a lot more than they ever have in the past. So I think that bodes well for him. He might backdoor his way into a Duke Johnson, James White sort of back end RB1 season. But I think long term, when you look at his time in the next couple of years, he's a solid RB2. I think maybe Joe Mixon gets let go by the Bengals, and I'm just bringing every Bengal to Tennessee, but maybe he comes there or somebody like that. But I think Spears is going to be the lead guy that they bring in a complement for. Other than Chandler in Minnesota, I think they bring in a lead guy that Chandler complements.
Yep.
So I think that's the biggest difference. I will say, though, if I had a share of Tyjae Spears, people are going bonkers for him right now. I would seriously consider moving off of that share because you might get a first and something for him right now. And like, people are going crazy because it's that old Derrick Henry. Everybody sees Derrick Henry top 1, 2, 3 running back gone. Tyjae Spears is going to get 450 touches. He's not. But but I like him. I like him a lot.
And that's the other thing, right? With this class not having, like, I don't have a running back in my top 9, 10 guys right now in Superflex. So
I wouldn't take one in the first round in a Superflex draft.
And that could definitely change, right? We could see somebody
100%.
that pops out, and you're always going to find running backs that have fantasy success in drafts, no matter what. Like, there's always going to, because they get so much work. So many of them get work. That is what's going to help with the selling point, and why I think Tyjae, or a lot of these guys that we talk about today, and a lot of guys that we're not going to talk about, could be sells because there's not going to be that incoming influx of guys that people are really high on. So if people are going into the season and they're thinking, I need running back, they may overpay for any of these guys that look. So if you have the Zamir Whites or the Tyjae Spears or the Ty Chandlers right now, and you can move them for a good price, I would do it. And maybe somebody lands in those spots and you look like a genius. Maybe they end up being the lead guy for the whole year. Chances are some of them are going to get hurt and you're going to win on that anyway. But But that's where I'm at with just running backs, the position in general, right? We don't know where these big guys are going to end up. Derrick Henry's going somewhere and taking carries from somebody. Saquon's going somewhere and taking carries from somebody. Jacobs is going somewhere. Now, I don't think that's going to be Tennessee, right? Because if you're going to do that, then just keep your guy. That's the face, been the face of your franchise for 3 years. So that's why I don't see them going out and signing one of those big name running backs, but drafting one, maybe not, or maybe so.
I think
Yeah, it doesn't
more
make
likely.
sense for organization rebuilding to put a bunch of money into a running back. But you know,
agree.
Tyjae Spears did have a pretty impressive rookie year, and another rookie that we didn't really get to see a ton of this last season was Kendre Miller. He started off the year injured, if I'm not mistaken, and
Yep.
of course, when Alvin Kamara came back, Alvin Kamara is a phenomenal athlete, definitely one of the best running backs in the league when he's healthy. The Saints overall, though, were pretty disappointing this last season. I personally thought Derek Carr would come there, at least make them decent, and they were less than decent. They had their moments, but super inconsistent team. Now, Alvin Kamara is still on this roster and still under contract. I mean, sure, he could be let go. Another team that could just, I don't know. They kind of got themselves stuck with the Derek Carr situation, so they're probably just going to roll with him and maybe just keep Alvin Kamara on the roster, which definitely hurts Kendre Miller's ability to really get a nice breakout season in, especially when you have a guy like that above him. I kind of feel the way I feel about Kendre Miller is how I felt about Zamir White last year after I heard Josh Jacobs was tagged. Like a guy that I still want to hold on to. I still have hope for. It's just I don't know how much work we're going to see from him with Alvin Kamara still there. Obviously, we still have a lot of offseason to happen in the draft, so a lot of things can change till then. But as it stands right now, I'm holding on to Kendre Miller, and I really think that he's more likely to break out in 2025 than he is in 2024. Now, Rick, you added him to this list, so are there some things here that you're thinking that I'm missing, or that something that you think will happen? You think he'll be utilized a lot more with an aging Alvin Kamara back there?
I absolutely think they've got to use him more next year. I think that I think Kamara is also, if I'm not mistaken, Kamara is also one of the big cap casualty possibilities in the
$10 million next
NFL
year.
This year, because the Saints, I believe, are still over the cap, right? Like they're
over by like $80 million.
Yeah,
right?
they have to cut, so he may not be there. But I think even if he is, they've always wanted to have somebody else with Alvin Kamara, right? Like, look what they did last year. They brought in Jamal Williams, who was coming off leading the NFL in rushing touchdowns, and drafted Kendre Miller. So they want to have more than one back. They want to utilize more than one back, but Jamal wasn't nearly as effective last year, and Kendre could not get healthy for the majority of the season. And then when he finally got the opportunity at the end of the year, looked pretty good. He was my number 3 running back in the class last year. I like him a lot. But again, like Achane, he's got to be healthy and get on the field. But I do think that if he is next year, he is a backmate. I think we mentioned the Detroit backfield earlier. I could see that being a similar scenario with Alvin and Kendre in New Orleans.
I like Kendre Miller. I'm like Rick, had him as my number 3 coming out last year. I really liked a ton of what I saw from him on his film when we watched him, and I still think that stuff is there. His injuries started in like mini camp, like OTAs and stuff. He had some hammy issues, and that stuff just carried through. But I don't know. I think Jonathan Williams or whatever the heck his name is that was there is like that's not happening. Jamal, thank you. I don't think that's happening anymore. There's only about 400 Williams that I could pick from to play in the NFL.
He's a pretty unique guy.
And
like that Williams guy.
And J names though. Like there's a lot of
I like the Sunday morning shows. Do you think Jay will do good today? Sure.
Which one?
But right. But
one of them's
I think that
probably
close the book on that. I think probably the biggest piece is it really sounds like Taysom Hill is going to be the biggest cap casualty in New Orleans from what I'm reading. And you think about how many rushing touchdowns that guy has hawked from us fantasy managers over the last X number of years. So it sounds like Taysom's going to be cut. So that's a huge benefit to every other offensive player on that team. But I think Miller is the second running back there, and I think he's the goal line back. And I know that that Kamara has shown us the ability to punch it in from short yardage. But I think that's really what Kendre Miller does better than anybody else on that roster. And I could see him having a nice solid RB2 season in a complimentary role. I don't think Kamara goes anywhere. I was just looking at his numbers. He's still a $17 million cap hit unless they do post June 1, and then he's a $1.8 million, so maybe. But I still think that ownership and that team and Allen himself kind of thinks they can win, especially in that dumpster fire of a division. So if they can rejuvenate that offense a little bit, like you were right, Bryce, like Carr wasn't very good last year, but it wasn't very good with Dalton the year before either, or the last few years of Drew Brees. So there's a lot of runway left there for improvement. And I think Miller is just a solid running back. Like I just think he's kind of old schoolish running back. Like we're talking about all these young, smaller, fast guys. I think Miller's just kind of old school, pound you through the middle, 3.5 to 4.5 yards per carry and score. So, and he has a little pop in the passing game too. I like him. I would add him almost more than anyone on this list when you factor in cost, because he's dirt cheap. Nobody wants him, and everybody thinks he's a bust, right?
I would. Yep, he's probably going to be my number one buy of the offseason, to be completely honest.
I like him. I just don't buy running backs, but typically when they're that cheap, you kind of have to. So
it's gonna be hard to draft them. So that's the tough part. It's gonna be hard to draft running backs.
Yes. Yeah, last year during the draft, it was kind of hard to value the running backs after the first two, for me personally. And, Kendre Miller was your guys' number 3, and he was my number 4. But my number 3 is our last running back here, and that's Roschon Johnson. I think if this dude didn't play for, wasn't Bijan Robinson's backup running back, he would have been probably drafted earlier in the NFL draft. And we got little sprinkles of him. And I thought by far he was the most talented running back on the Bears roster last year. I really wish that we got to see more. I wish there wasn't a committee and it was just him and Justin Fields back there. I think that's when they were the best. So I'm in love with Roschon Johnson. I would really like to see him. The Bears got a new offensive coordinator moving into this year, so who knows if they continue that committee approach. Maybe they'll consider the committee just Justin Fields, or I guess Caleb Williams could be there, whoever, and then Roschon Johnson. But if it's Justin Fields, obviously they're going to be running a lot more with him. So if they could just run with Justin Fields and Roschon Johnson as their 2 main ball carriers, I think that bodes really, really well for Roschon Johnson fantasy-wise, and he can catch the ball. He's very, very efficient at that as well. So, as a Bears fan, Rick, I'm sure you're excited for Roschon Johnson. I know you've been collecting his cards. So is he an easy breakout candidate for you?
Yeah, I think that there's just no way that he doesn't get more work. Obviously, what happened last year, we had 3 running backs that were really pretty good when they got their opportunity, right? Donta Foreman was good when he got his, Khalil Herbert, and Roschon. And, Donta Foreman ended up being a healthy scratch the past couple the last couple games of the season. And Roschon started to get worked in more and taken even more from Khalil Herbert. So I just see that continuing. Now, when we're talking about Shane Waldron coming over from Seattle, you guys know I was a big Zach Charbonnet guy. And after Waldron came over, I seen a graphic where Seattle was the most successful when their running backs hit the hole that they were intended to hit. The problem is both running backs in Seattle had very poor vision and rarely hit the hole. And I'm talking about way under the next worst team in the NFL. The Bears, on the other hand, with Getsy, who we talked about earlier for, Zamir White, they hit the hole probably, I think they were 7th or 8th in the league, and then they were 5th in efficiency when they hit the hole. So the Bears have the running backs to capitalize on what Shane Waldron does with the run game. So that's really exciting to me because the run game, even though we've been 1st and 2nd over the past 2 years, may be even more explosive than it has been the past couple of years. And I think Roschon is probably going to lead the backfield, even with Khalil Herbert there, in touches next year and definitely in receptions. He's a better pass blocker. He's a better receiver, and he runs just as well, but he's way better at the short yardage and goal line stuff than Khalil Herbert is. So all of that stuff leans towards Roschon. I love him. Yes, I'm collecting. I found one of his other 101s today and was talking to the guy about snagging that for the rainbow. But, him and Kendre Miller and Zach Charbonnet were like literally all 3, 4, 5, but they were like, pick your poison. And
Right.
now Charbonnet's moved out of that. Achane has moved ahead of those guys probably a little bit. And then Kendre and Roschon I have right there in the same tier. But I like him a lot.
I don't really know if I have much to add, right? Like the Bears expert just kind of gave us a good breakdown there. I think the biggest problem in Chicago from on the outside looking in is they were all good, right? And for whatever reason, Roschon didn't seem to get the run or the leash that the other two did when they got the chance. But at the same time, I have a feeling the Bears might have been protecting their asset a little bit. And, the Bears were pretty early in the season not looking like a playoff team. So what's the point of running Roschon out there and getting his doors blown off when you can run the other two guys out there that really aren't the guys that we brought into the organization and probably not a guy we're going to move on to. And I guess they did bring in Foreman. They signed him as a free agent, but nonetheless, they scratched him early and they scratched him late. So there's something weird there, but Roschon's just good. And I think he had an outside shot at being a late first round NFL drafted running back had he played behind anyone other than Bijan Robinson. He's that good.
Played in front of him.
Because the one thing that Roschon had coming out of college that I hadn't seen from many guys is his ability to pick up the blitz or the secondary safety or whatever as a pass blocker exceptionally well. And that gives him a big boost over Herbert on all downs because it allows you to put him on the field, be a little bit more disguise of an offense and throw the ball in first and second down as opposed to just being a third down guy. So I think he's a very good buy right now. I think he's absolutely going to break out. And I think him and Herbert both have good seasons. The only part I'm not sure about is how much is, like Charbonnet didn't like really get a whole lot of run last year. How much of that was Pete Carroll? Because Pete Carroll's always sort of seemed to be a bell cowish, this is my guy running back. And how much of that was Waldron. So we'll see what happens when they get going in Chicago. But they have two good running backs. Offensive line in Chicago, way better than most people thought, and got better as the season went on. And Rick will tell you how efficient they were on the ground. So Roschon 100% belongs on this list, and he's probably the guy I like best next to Kendre. So I like him.
All right, let's pivot over to the wide receiver position. And I mean, I'm not sure, but I think all of us had Jaxon Smith-Njigba as the number one wide receiver coming out into the pros this last year. Really didn't have a super exciting rookie year, but I will say things did get better. The last half of the year, he started scoring a lot more touchdowns, getting a lot more looks. And I wouldn't say disappointing, but the lackluster usage of Jaxon Smith-Njigba wasn't really surprising to me when it comes to where he landed. Landing with the Seattle Seahawks, they already had DK Metcalf there, and an established veteran in Tyler Lockett. Now Tyler Lockett seems like he's on his way out. He's getting older. So they probably need to move forward with DK Metcalf and Jaxon Smith-Njigba. And when you roll both of those guys out at the same time, I don't think that DK Metcalf will hold on to the number one wide receiver for that team spot for long. I think Jaxon Smith-Njigba is much more skilled as a wide receiver, where I think DK Metcalf is just a better athlete, especially when it comes to size, speed, and strength. But when it comes to playing wide receiver, I think Jaxon Smith-Njigba is the best on this team, which leads him to be a breakout candidate. I expect him to have a much larger role in 2024 for the Seahawks. Rick, I know you were big on Jaxon Smith-Njigba. Do you see him surpassing DK Metcalf as the team's best receiver?
I mean, I don't know if I would say that. DK is pretty good. But I do think he has the potential to do that. And I think this year is going to be a breakout. I would say Tyler Lockett gets released, right? They save like 11 million or something if they cut him. So I could definitely see it being DK and JSN, and that's the wide receiver core, and him having a big year. So definitely think he's going to have a breakout year for sure, because I think he's going to be the number 2. And looking at his rookie season, Geno, while improving greatly the past 2 years over what he was early in his career, is not a guy that can sustain 3 wide receivers. It's just he's not that guy, right? So all of them probably had a worse season than they probably should have because there was 3 of them and your quarterback can't do it, right? So I think Geno can definitely, we saw it the year before, Lockett and Metcalf both good. I think if you just have the 2 there, they can, and they're going to get probably 75% of the targets. They'll eat and they'll both be good. And who ends up the number 1 or the 2, I don't know, fantasy wise, but I think they're both going to be good. So I'm definitely, yes, in on JSN as a breakout in 2024.
I think it's kind of funny in a way. I'm sitting here chuckling at myself, looking at his numbers from last year. How we've changed on our expectations of rookie wide receivers. JSN was the clear third wide receiver in that offense at 93 targets last year. So, like, that's a shit ton of targets for a guy who's the third guy in your offense on an offense that you don't necessarily look at as a pass friendly or first offense. I think Rick's 100% right. I think Lockett moves along. I think JSN slides into the 1A, 1B role in that offense. Biggest concern I have there is can Geno Smith become more like he was the year before and less like he was last year? But I just think that he's in a really good spot. He's going to break out. He absolutely was my wide receiver 1 last year. And, it's easy to say you would take Puka Nacua over him now. But if I was redrafting that season, he would be at worst my second. So I like him a lot. No worries in my eyes. No reason to be concerned. I think his role just greatly elevates.
Yeah, I agree. He should be in for a solid year 2. So let's go over one of the more polarizing guys I know that you guys have strong opinions on, and I don't really have that strong of opinion. I just like to play devil's advocate because I think I have 1 share of this guy in like 12 leagues. But Quentin Johnston is nonetheless still a candidate to be a breakout player. Depending on what the Chargers do, I mean, it seems like Keenan Allen is going to be playing there next year. I don't know about Mike Williams. So that number 2 wide receiver position is kind of up for grabs. And I personally do think that Josh Palmer should be in that spot as their second best wide receiver with Quentin Johnston as the 3. But, they did invest quite a bit of draft capital in Quentin Johnston, which, whether we think it's right or not, sometimes draft capital still gives you opportunity. Where, Josh Palmer was not a guy that they invested a lot of draft capital on. So does Quentin Johnston have the opportunity to be a flexible asset? Because, I'm not going to – no way, shape, or form do I see him as a wide receiver 1. And it's kind of far-fetched to see him even as a low wide receiver 2. But I wouldn't be surprised if he was a guy that we felt somewhat comfortable putting in our flex position moving forward into next year with Justin Herbert slinging the ball, because Justin Herbert is Dak Prescott-esque when it comes to being able to, like you said, Geno's not the guy that can feed 3 people, but Justin Herbert might be able to. So the opportunity might be there for Quentin Johnston to be a flex asset. So I'll let you guys pick him apart because I know you're not fans of him. Who wants to go first? Sully, you look like you're ready.
I'm pumped.
He sat up in his seat.
He's like,
right? I think there's more chance that Quentin Johnston is J.J. Arcega-Whiteside than he is anything relevant in fantasy football. And the history of, since I've been tracking guys drafted since like 2000, if you're a rookie wide receiver, top 100 drafted guy, and you stay healthy for your entire or first year and you don't do anything, you almost never do. And the only guy that really bucked that trend was Devonta Parker, who had 1 good season. So I don't see Quentin Johnston, who I didn't like coming out, looks like a body catcher to me. Like, other than not being able to catch and run at the same time, he's probably pretty good. Like, Palmer can do those things. Like, we saw Johnston drop some horrifically walk-in touchdown passes. First-round talent shouldn't do that. And then you add in that Greg Roman just became the offensive coordinator in Los Angeles. I'm looking to move off of a lot of my Chargers shares, and I'm sure as shit not looking to add any Quentin Johnston shares, who's probably still the 3rd best wide receiver in an offense that is going to run 4.
Keenan Allen,
5?
Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and Josh Palmer.
well, we don't know if Mike Williams.
I think Williams is gone, but
Yeah,
I
But
don't
I
then
would
know.
agree with that. I would agree with
whoever
that.
the running back is, Brock Bowers, when they draft him as their tight end, like he
Donald
might be
Parham.
They're drafting tackle. I'm telling you, they're going to draft tackle.
anyway. Greg Roman's the biggest concern, other than the fact that Quentin Johnston isn't any good. Like I think Greg Roman averages being a bottom 28 passing offense every year that he's been an offensive coordinator in the NFL. And I don't see that changing. And it's not good for Justin Herbert, Keenan Allen, all those other guys we listed. But no, I'm a further out on Quentin Johnston than I am on Bryce Young. And that's all I got to say.
Fair enough.
I I I I haven't been close enough to Quentin Johnston to even be able to smell him. And he could have practiced the 2-a-days and not taken a shower, and I still haven't been close enough to Quentin Johnston to smell him.
You were
You
really
guys
down
know
on him. I will say
I've
that. Like,
always been out. You look at his college, yes, he has every player, almost every player in the NFL has run after the catchability. They're all good. That's
not
the
if you can't
only thing that
catch.
he had. That's the only
You
thing
have
that
to have
he
the
had.
catch to have the run after the catch.
Well,
That's his
right.
biggest challenge.
Right, but that's literally the only thing that he had. And when you look at his college, again, we talked about Tyjae. When you look at Quentin Johnston's last year, he had like three big games that were like 70% of his production. One of them came against Michigan. So tough defense. Okay. After that, they were against like SMU and Colorado State, and it wasn't. He didn't do stuff against big teams and good defensive teams. Most of his damage was done against bottom like 80 and below defenses in college football, right? 80 to 132 or whatever they've got. So he wasn't consistent even in college. You could argue, okay, he didn't have the biggest quarterback, but other guys were more consistent in that offense. They just didn't have the big boom weeks that Quentin Johnston had. And I want to see guys that are consistent in college, especially when they don't play, especially not in the SEC, right? Like if you're not playing in the SEC, then you're going to have an easier time than anybody else. And he's not even in the Big Ten. So I wanted to see more consistency out of him. And it just wasn't there. And with so much production being in so few games and so many like literally dud games in college, I was very, very worried about him. And again, we're looking at a smaller league now. He's taller, he's got good size, but he doesn't have the speed, right? Like if you're going to be 6'4" anymore, you still got to have 4.4 speed. And I don't remember where Quentin Johnston fell in, but when you watch him, he doesn't look that fast.
I don't know. It wouldn't be that far off. Like probably 4 or 5 something.
But he doesn't look like he plays that fast, right? And that was another concern for me when watching him on film was that you can run great in a straight line, but if you aren't quick on the field, then that's an issue. So I've just been completely out. And when
apparently
I watched,
apparently he's a 4.3 guy, but then he ran sub 4.5 at TCU's pro day. So who knows?
So he just doesn't look like he plays that fast. So when he gets an open field, he can turn it on, but like you got to be able to run your fast and do everything fast when you're in the NFL. And if you don't, then you're not playing at the speed that you need to play at. Maybe he has maybe he hits 1,000 yards in a year. We've seen random wide receivers do that, but I just don't see him consistent. I don't see him ever being a guy that I feel comfortable putting in my lineup. He is like the poor man's Mike Williams, who we've never really been comfortable putting in the lineup week to week because we never knew what we were going to get. So that's where I'm at with Quentin Johnston. I'm completely out. I want nothing to do with him.
So real quick, we talked about JSN getting 93 targets as a rookie, and he had Lockett and Metcalf healthy for the majority of the year. We had Mike Williams go down super early in the season last year. We had Keenan Allen banged up for the back half of the season. And Quentin Johnston had 67 targets last season. Like, doesn't that say something about even how the team, and I know Justin Herbert was hurt and they were Easton Stick and all that other stuff, right? But you draft a guy that early in the first round in a pretty deep wide receiver class, and you throw the ball to him 67 times? Like, to me, there's an underlying, maybe it's a work ethic thing, doesn't practice, maybe he doesn't block. because a lot of rookie wide receivers don't get on the field if they're not going to show the ability to engage and block. I don't know, but I think there's a lot of negatives against a guy when you're that highly drafted and that poorly used for boding well for you going forward, especially when you're bringing in a hard ass coach and an offensive coordinator that loves to pound the ball on the ground. So I don't want anything to do with them.
Well, to put that in perspective, you just 1 second. You said 67 targets.
Yeah.
So he barely had more than Jalen Reagor had in his rookie year.
But those again, that's another example of a guy who was a rookie, highly drafted, stay healthy, and fizzled right out, right?
And that's why I brought him up. Now, well, actually, Reagor only played 11 games his rookie year and had 54 targets. So he was averaging 5 targets per game. So what did Quentin Johnston average? He played all 17, right?
Yeah, he started 10 and got 67 targets. So
he played in 17.
Yes, he did. His biggest target game was he had 5 catches on 7 targets for 52 yards in a thrilling 6-0 win over the Patriots.
So he averaged 3.9 per game. So he didn't even average as many as Jalen Reagor, who's one of the biggest first-round wide receiver busts in the past 5-6 years.
Same school.
That's rough.
Same school, right?
Yeah, let's talk about another team. I'm done talking about Quentin Johnston with you guys. I don't really care too much anyway, but
I wonder if I have. I don't. If I was going to go look for Quentin Johnston shares to sell you, but I don't think I have any. So,
I only have one. I wouldn't pay much. I mean, even in the league that I got him, it was the league I won, and I think I bought him for like 4% of my budget. It was like 40.
Yeah, there you go.
That was
probably gave you 4% of your productivity.
He started 1 week for me, and I think it was the week he played the Patriots, so he did all right. So let's pivot over to another team. Like, we were talking about Quentin Johnston's speed. Let's go to his fast wide receiver on a team that I think somebody needs to step up as the number 2 in Jameson Williams. I would say, in that playoff game, I know people want to blame Dan Campbell's gambling for the loss, but Dan Campbell was doing that all year, so he stayed true to what he was doing. Who I think lost him that game was Craig Reynolds.
Wait. I just want to say, because this keeps being the argument. When you do that stuff in the regular season, you don't go home. When you play that way and you miss in the week 14, you aren't sent home for the rest of the year.
Yeah, but
there's a big difference between.
But it's all subjective. It's subjective. What if he lines up for the field goal, the kicker misses it? Then he's going to get blamed for not doing what he was doing all year that was successful, right? So it's all bad when it doesn't work out, and it's good when it does, right?
I love Dan Campbell, and I think most people do, but the writing was on the wall, or the tea leaves, or the red flags, or whatever the saying is. When he went for that 2-point conversion in Dallas from like the 9-yard line, I was like, okay, that's a little bit crazy. His game management of that game in the NFC Championship is the reason they lost that football game. And I get it. He is who he is, and it is what he does, and good for him, but he shit the bed. And it is what it is.
I'll put 50 on Dan Campbell. I'll put 50 right on Craig Reynolds. Craig Reynolds had 2 catchable, 1 really easy drop.
Oh, Josh Reynolds.
Sorry, Josh Reynolds. Thank you.
Reynolds
had two plays that would have also probably won them that game. And they were both one was a little bit more of a difficult catch. One was routine that he should have easily caught on 4th down to extend those gutsy calls, right? Or would have made those gutsy calls a great play call when it was all said and done, right? If it was executed. But nonetheless, Josh Reynolds disappointed. Jameson Williams usage has been a little bit confusing to me. I don't know, I don't really look too much into it because Amon Ra is fantastic, right? They got that solidified number 1. And that number 2 they don't really have a guy outside of Sam Laporta and Amon Ra that's consistently stepping up. And it seems like every time Jameson Williams gets the opportunity, he seizes it, right? So does he become a breakout candidate for that team? I'm not sure what Josh Reynolds' contract looks like or anything like that, but it seems like the more talented receiver is Jameson Williams. Could he get more involved in that exciting offense for the for the Lions, or do we kind of get something similar to, like, I guess, a few weeks ago we were talking about Dallas Goedert in the sense of, is there too many mouths to feed where we struggle to see consistent performances outside maybe the top two pass catching threats and maybe the running backs as well that are also involved in the pass game? Well, I guess just Zamir Gibbs, but nonetheless, could does Jameson Williams get the opportunity to be a consistent fantasy producer? Is he going to be a guy that he's probably going to have those good weeks when he's on your bench?
I think consistency is the key word there. I don't think so. I think, we touched on it earlier, how the NFL seems to be getting a little bit smaller and faster. I think from what I'm seeing is the offenses are taking less and less field stretching deep targets as well. And you look at an offense like Detroit and Johnston staying there as the offensive coordinator. They love their over the middle, underneath attacking zone type plays that Amon-Ra and Sam Laporta thrived in. You have two running backs that are I won't say equally talented, because I think Gibbs is a more talent than Montgomery, but Montgomery is a damn good running back. And you have a really good quarterback that's comfortable going on long, sustained drives. And I don't think Jameson really factors into that much as his role in the offense. And I was sell Jameson Williams, get out while you can earlier in the season, and I've softened on it a little bit. But I think his target high this season was 7. So I don't think he's going to be a big PPR guy for you, and I don't think he's going to necessarily be a big touchdown guy for you. So I think he's a flex guy. And I think, so does he break out? I don't know. I guess if he's going to break out from where he is at now, like he struggled to stay on the field, he had his gambling suspension, he has all these other crazy things. But if he can give you a full 17 game season, he's probably a top 36 wide receiver. So I think he probably breaks out. Rick?
Yeah, I'm not going to add a lot here. I think Jameson Williams very talented. I think that he was kind of one of the more, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, he needs a little more time than a lot of the first rounders that we've seen over the past few years, in my opinion, because he wasn't like heavily he was stuck behind some guys at Alabama. Did pretty well, but he also had some other studs there. So the tough part is that there's so many different weapons, and they are not afraid to spread the ball around. Obviously, Amon-Ra is going to get his 12 targets a week or whatever he gets, but they're not afraid to spread the ball around. I do think that he could very well be their number 2 wide receiver, Laporta their number 2 pass catcher, probably, but their offense is really good, and I think they're only going to get better the longer they play together and the longer they figure each other out. So I'm definitely on board with him having a breakout year. Like you said, first year, I didn't even expect him. He was coming back from that injury. Takes a while to get your legs under you. So rookie year, I didn't really care about anything that happened. This year, obviously, your team gets going without you, and you're sidelined for making a legal bet in the wrong, the wrong space. That's literally all that he did, and he lost 6 games.
Yep.
So, then you're behind the ball with everybody. And then the way they used him, though, and the way they trusted him in that playoff game leads me to believe that he is going to get more opportunity next year. And if he seizes that opportunity, it could be, I mean, he has the upside to be a monster. He could be a back end wide receiver 1, maybe not next year, but in the future, because he's got that physical talent. It'll just have to see how it plays out.
Yeah. Speaking of a guy that we know, I think we all can agree that Drake London can be a top wide receiver in the NFL. He had the double shitty combo of both bad quarterback play and bad coaching when it came to utilizing the talent on the team with Arthur Smith. Both of those things are probably going to be different here moving into 2024 with Atlanta has to figure something out at quarterback, and they now have the new coach from the Rams defensive coordinator. I can't even think of his name, but
Raheem Morris.
Yes, Raheem Morris. Thank you. Do we see Drake London being the focal point of that offense? I mean, obviously we got Bijan there and Kyle Pitts as well. Bijan and Drake London should be the focal points moving forward, and Drake should be the number 1 target for whatever quarterback goes into there. who knows who it's going to be? Could it be Kirk Cousins? Could it be Justin Fields? Could it be a rookie they trade up to draft? Could they draft one, stay where they're at and draft outside of those top three guys that probably won't fall that far? I think we can all agree we expect better QB play nonetheless. Is Drake London an easy breakout candidate for you guys? Do you see him eclipsing, maybe getting into the top 12 this upcoming season, or does it? I guess it depends who falls there, right? Because if it's Kirk Cousins, I would say Drake London is going to be a top 12 fantasy producer in 2024. And I'd even probably say that if Justin Fields landed there. But when you're talking about a rookie quarterback, that's when things can get a little bit murky depending on which one they get. What are your thoughts on Drake London, Sully?
I think he just needs basic average quarterback play. Kirk Cousins takes him to a whole new level. Justin Fields takes him to a whole new level. Hell, Ryan Tannehill would take him to a whole new level. He had, what did he have? 117 and 110 targets in his first two seasons, but his catch rate is low. Why is his catch rate low? Not because he's not a good wide receiver. It's because passes weren't catchable. And Raheem Morris, apparently one of his first comments as in his press conferences was to talk about Bijan Robinson and Drake London. So I have all the confidence in the world in Drake London. I'm a little bit happier that he might be a little easier to buy this offseason than he has been in the past. But I think he is Mike Evans-like, Keenan Allen-like. Like, I think he's that talented that he can be that relevant for a long, long time. He just needs to get her going, and I think he will this season.
Yeah, I mean, I see him as a guy that could go to 1,200 receiving yards. He only had 2 touchdowns in 2023. He only had 4 in his rookie year. So there's upside in the touchdown department, and their offense should be good. If they, even with worse quarterback play, or not worse quarterback play, but even with the quarterback play they've had, the offense should still be better.
Yes.
And I do see him having a big year 3 breakout. I love Drake London. I'm looking forward to it, so I'm on board 100%.
All right. Let's talk about a guy that kind of gave us, progressed throughout the season, ended the, regular season really, really strong, and is going to be playing in the Super Bowl tomorrow. Rashee Rice, obviously in the most exciting position. Every time there's an offseason or free agent, it was like this when Brady was in New England. Everyone wants them to go to they always want pass catchers to go to the Chiefs, right? Well, it hasn't really worked out the past couple of years, right, since Tyreek Hill left. But Rashee Rice getting drafted there, what looked at first to be, continuing that trend, but man, as the season progressed and near the end of the year, he has looked really, really impressive. So I think can he continue that momentum into 2024? Do we think the Chiefs still bring in a guy to still be the number one wide receiver? Will Drake London take that step to be that team's best receiving option outside of Travis Kelce in 2024, if Travis Kelce does continues playing into 2024?
Can he keep the momentum? No. And the reason why is because not only will they bring in one guy, but they're probably going to bring in multiple guys at the wide receiver position. They just had, I think it was one of the most, one of the seasons with the most drops by wide receiver group ever. Nobody beyond Rice in the wide receiver group is somebody that you can trust. You can't trust MVS. You can't trust Mecole Hardman. You can't trust Sky Moore. You can't trust Justin Watson. Like you literally have
Darius Toney.
Darius Toney. Well, he's not. I mean, I don't even count him. He's not even dressing with that squad, right? He's a scratch. And
that dude is insane.
But
hey, for all the things I've gotten wrong, at least I was right about him. Anyway,
I was wrong about him.
I'll still contend. Same thing with Claypool. They've got the talent. It's all here, and that's
it's
Jameson
definitely
Winston,
here with them.
all here, right? So, that's the hard part. We don't get to evaluate these guys on their brain and the way they work and everything else. So, no, I don't think you can keep the momentum going. I think we could see them bring in. Literally everybody behind him could be replaced in that wide receiver group, and I wouldn't be surprised. So that's the really, really, really hard part. I do think he's good. I do think he's going to be, he's probably going to have a better season, so you may consider it a breakout. But I think people that want him to be the number one, he may be, but he's not going to dominate as the receiver as he has the past 6 or 7 weeks of the year, right? Like they're going to have more options. And they're going to figure that out. Andy Reid's too good. Patrick Mahomes doesn't give a shit. He'll spread it around. We saw Kelce not be involved for the back third of the season, right? Like, they don't care who it is. They're going to throw the ball to whoever will catch it. And
Or don't catch it. They'll still throw
well,
it to them.
when you have to, but I mean, when you bring in a new group, you hope that some of the guys can catch. And that's the only thing. I like Rashee Rice a lot. I do think that he's probably going to be a sell because people are going to expect him to be the dude. And I wouldn't be surprised if they tried to bring in a T. Higgins or a Mike Evans, or if they drafted multiple guys in the NFL draft at receiver. So that's the hard part with Rashee Rice for me. I like him. I just don't know what they're going to do, but I know they have to do something.
Yeah, I think without question, they're going to sign at least one guy and draft at least one significant guy. This class coming up is too deep at the wide receiver position to overlook it yet again. I think that what I find interesting is Rashee Rice in Kansas City is not who he was at SMU. He was a field stretching wide receiver that they used with the deep game. And I think Kansas City didn't really trust him a lot early in the season. Like, he didn't get a ton of snaps, didn't play a lot. And then when it became clear that no one on the team could even catch a cold, that maybe we should give this guy a try. And he elevated his game based on his ability with yards after the catch. I think Kansas City, I could go on about forever and I'll be quick, but I think Kansas City could very easily lose Andy Reid and Travis Kelce after this Super Bowl. And then that changes everything there. But I have never seen a team in my entire life with worse pass catchers in the Super Bowl than this one, and Rice is leading it. So I think that he has the ability to break out over where he was last season, but not into like the upper echelon.
Yeah, I agree. That's the thing I worry about too. Well, I don't really worry about it, but I think that Kansas City definitely brings in guys, and it's going to be guys that are veterans that are going to, eat in, not necessarily eat in, but they're going to be more efficient in the sense of Pat Mahomes is going to target them more than Rashee Rice. It seems like he's in the perfect storm to get a lot of work as a rookie that, he wouldn't be getting in pretty much every other opportunity outside of maybe a couple more in the NFL. So let's talk about a guy that probably wouldn't be on this list if he played the full season in Tank Dell, right? This guy was blowing up. CJ Stroud, obviously due to credit to CJ Stroud, he had Nico Collins and Tank Dell as two top fantasy assets, both at the same time when both were healthy. I'm expecting Tank Dell. What I'm really wondering is, does Tank Dell, who's the number one on that team? Will it be Tank Dell? Will it be Nico Collins? Or will it just change every other week? That's what I think is more likely. I think 1 week it's going to be Dell, 1 week it's going to be Nico Collins. Wouldn't be surprised if that team brings in another wide receiver as well. But does Tank Dell continue what we were seeing from last year, or does kind of the more of that emergence that Nico Collins had once Tank Dell left, and the possibility they bring in a wide receiver, maybe put Tank Dell on the back burner as a potential breakout candidate into 2024? What do you think, Rick?
All I'm going to say is that as long as Tank Dell's on the field, he's going to be good, and he's probably the number one in Houston. And it's just the only reason why he's on this list, like you said, is because he was hurt. If he would have played the whole year, he would have already had his breakout. I fully expect him to break out, and it could be in a really big way with CJ Stroud, as long as Stroud doesn't have the sophomore slump that you talked about earlier. So that's I love Tank Dell. I wish I had some. I was late to the party.
Tank or Nico is the team's number one. Who do you think?
I think Tank's the number one. I think Nico's really good too, though. I think Nico was somebody that is
1A, 1B, kind of
underappreciated, was better than we thought, and those two are going to be good receivers with CJ Stroud for a long time. So health is it's Achane, right? It's the same thing. If he's healthy, he's good.
I agree.
Yeah. I think Houston's more likely to add a running back or something to complement the offense than they are another wide receiver. I think that anytime you have a quarterback who's pounding the table at the draft to draft a guy, and then they draft the guy, and then you see what they did together, I'm all in on Tank Dell. It doesn't happen very often, but I wouldn't be surprised if both Tank Dell and Nico Collins knock on the door of being top 12 fantasy wide receivers next season. So give me all the Tank Dell I can get. And like Rick, I got none. I missed that boat.
Yeah,
sad too.
I did
so
too,
sad.
and I was telling people to draft Tank Dell, and I just didn't get him. So that was.
Those are always the hardest, right? When you pump up a guy,
yeah.
but every one of your drafts, like you're in the wrong spot in the draft where you could have got him where you were at in another draft. And it's like, damn it, if I would have picked 8 here instead of 10, I would have got him. But over here, he was available at 10, but I didn't pick and I didn't have a first rounder. It's just like, oh man, I'm upset I missed him.
I'd like to say that was my problem, but it wasn't. That wasn't my problem. He wasn't even on my radar.
He wasn't on mine either. Him or
he was on mine for that exact story you were just talking about, Sully. When because I heard it early and I was like, oh, dude, that's gonna that doesn't happen and then like not be used, especially with opportunities there. So
right,
yeah, that was a bummer for me. All right, let's finish off the wide receivers with the guy with the highest ceiling of all the guys we talked about so far, and that's Garrett Wilson. It's kind of weird putting him as a breakout player, right? He was offensive. Did he get? Yeah, he got rookie of the year last year.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much is already quarterback proof. His first 2 years in the NFL has had the worst quarterback play probably of any wide receiver, but yet has produced, and that's what makes him so great that he's still on this breakout list after that, because this guy can be wide receiver 1, and I don't think any of us would really bat an eye to it. And next year is definitely a possibility with Aaron Rodgers throwing him the ball. Aaron Rodgers even said, like, I played with a great number 17 my whole career, and this Garrett Wilson's a really, really good another good number 17. So I think that they already have a bond and a connection, and I expect them to be a really, really good duo next year. I am predicting Garrett Wilson is a top 5 fantasy wide receiver next year, and it would not surprise me one bit if he ended the season as the number 1 fantasy producer at the wide receiver position. Anybody you disagree with that, Sully?
Yeah.
Okay.
But being number 5, no. Being number 1, yes. I think there's 4 guys.
It's unlikely, but
I think 4 guys. I think there's 4 guys that I have a tier ahead of him, and it's Jefferson, Chase,
talent-wise, or
Lamb.
just. Do you think talent-wise?
Well, I think Jefferson, Chase, Lamb are just as talented or more talented. Yes.
Okay.
I would put him 4th.
I would say just as for sure, or more. But I mean,
sure. Okay. But in fairness to Garrett Wilson, he has basically, like you said, had just absolute dog shit for quarterback play. Chase has had Burrow, Jefferson's had Cousins, Lamb's had Dak, and Wilson has nothing. Right. Crazy talent. We talked about this show before. Like when I watched Hard Knocks and I watched him and Sauce go head to head, I fell in love with both of those guys. You just see how much fun they have, how hard they work, and how talented they are. You give him Aaron Rodgers, he has the ability to be a top 5 wide receiver easy. So he won't break out. He'll shatter whatever he does if he has a decent amount of quarterback play.
There's only 2 wide receivers in the NFL right now that I would take over Garrett Wilson if I was in a startup. I'll take him ahead of CD Lamb. I said last year with Aaron Rodgers the whole season, we would literally be talking about Garrett Wilson as potentially one of the 3, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, and Garrett Wilson. Next year at this time, I think we're going to be talking about 4 guys, and it's going to be those 3 with Marvin Harrison Jr. I think Garrett Wilson is as talented as anybody, and he has had the worst quarterback play in a 2-year stretch than I've seen any wide receiver of his caliber have, I think. It's been bad. Yeah. We've seen other bad quarterback play where you could still get yards, right? Jameis Winston throwing 30 and 30, could get the ball down the field, though, and those guys could rack up the stats. Garrett Wilson wasn't even in a position where he could really rack up stats because the quarterbacks couldn't do shit. So
he did great with what he had.
Yeah, what he did with them, you give him a competent quarterback. This dude, I think, could lead the league in yards, could be the number 1 fantasy wide receiver in football. I love Garrett Wilson, and I hate that I like so many freaking Ohio State wide receivers, but they just keep spitting out the badasses.
They do.
And you won't hear me say anything bad about Garrett Wilson. And he could go for 1,700 yards next year. Wouldn't surprise me with a healthy Aaron Rodgers. It would surprise me if he did it with Zach Wilson if Rodgers went down again. But but dude's a beast.
Won't be Zach Wilson.
Dude's a beast.
Yep.
Y'all sleeping on CD Lamb, but that's another story for another day.
I like CD, but I just
I don't.
mean
I'm
you
not.
replace
Yeah, I'm
you
not talking
replace
bad
him and
about
Garrett
him.
Wilson. I think Garrett Wilson does everything he does, if not a little bit better. I wouldn't. I mean, that's all. That's all it is.
It'll be in a different style a little bit,
Yeah,
but
for sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
All right.
All right, let's pivot to the last position group, the tight end. We only have a couple guys we're going to talk about. We'll save the best. We'll save the best for last. So we'll start with Dalton Kincaid for the Buffalo Bills. So we really saw him, increase in production when Dawson Knox went down, and I was a little. I like Dalton Kincaid coming out of college. He was my second favorite tight end in this draft. Honestly, my first one was a miss, and that was Michael Mayer. But the jury's still out on him. I'll
Not
give him
yet.
a couple of years. Yeah,
he's
of
got
course.
time, but he's
Yeah,
not going to be the number one. I think Laporta is going to be the number one.
Yes, yeah. Laporta's blowing them all out of the water. Yeah.
So he
Laporta's
maybe
tight
a
end
miss
one.
is number one, but I still think Mayer could be a pretty good tight end.
Yeah, but Dalton Kincaid, when Dawson Knox went down, I think showed everyone what he was capable of as a pass catcher. He was pretty efficient in that role, and Josh Allen started targeting him a lot. And I think without Dawson Knox there, he was really, really good and a guy you felt comfortable starting every week. Dawson Knox kind of came back and ate back into his production, which was kind of strange because the talent is very different. Kincaid is much better. So I'm not sure if Dawson Knox is still going to be on the roster next year. I'm not sure what his contract situation is. But another year under the belt with Josh Allen, losing his number 2 receiver in Gabe Davis could kick the door open on Dalton Kincaid if they're not able to find a suitable wide receiver 2 to replace him, or if they have to draft a rookie to do so. Might again take some time.
There's talk they could trade Stephon Diggs too.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, but that's every offseason. Stephon Diggs is thought about traded every offseason, I feel like. It's
Knox isn't going anywhere.
Okay.
Knox may not be going anywhere, but Dalton Kincaid's the guy, and Dalton Kincaid is likely the number 2 option this passing game next year. Obviously, if they do keep Diggs or trade him, whatever, they are going to have to bring in some more wide receivers. But I think Dalton Kincaid is in for a big 2024 second year tight end season. So I'm
got him as a top 5.
Top 5, probably not. I think tight end's getting lengthened right now. I think we have a lot of solid tight ends in the league right now. So where I would put him number wise, I don't know, because like I said, I think Brock Bowers comes in and is probably top 5 right off the bat. I think he's that good at the tight end position. And then you've got the stalwarts, the Kelseys, the Andrews, the Kittles that could be in there. Cole Kmet was up there for a majority of this year. If he improves more, McBride, do what?
Unless Kyle Pitts ends up in Chicago, right?
They could both do it. They could both be good in that offense, especially if you don't go. You're not getting Marvin Harrison if you do that, right? Because you're taking Caleb Williams if you trade Fields. So
can't have everything.
So I think it's hard for me to put numbers on the tight end position right now because it's so volatile, but there's so many more names now than we've seen in a long time. Tight end position's coming up, and I think most leagues are going to have to go to a tight end premium or 2 tight end type of league because the tight end position is becoming more and more and more and more relevant in the NFL, just period, with the way these offenses are working. So it's hard for me to put that number on, but I think that he's a guy that's capable of doing that for sure.
I would argue that Dalton Kincaid broke out in his rookie season. He finished as a top 12 tight end, which is not easy to do as a rookie. And I know this season it was a little bit different because of Sam Laporta, but prior to this recent rookie pop, Kyle Pitts did it as a rookie. Evan Ingram did it as a rookie, but not very many guys do it as a rookie. So I think Dalton Kincaid has already broken out, and I would have him off the top of my head. Obviously, if Kelsey continues or not, changes it, but I would have him probably in my top 5 next year for sure. I just don't know what else he needs to do. I think that, maybe Diggs moves away, maybe he doesn't. Gabe Davis is almost for sure gone. I think Khalil Shakir is going to have a bigger role in that offense, but Kincaid he's a big slot receiver, right? He's not a traditional inline tight end, and he's really good. So I think he's fine.
Yeah, and exciting offense. So any
Yeah.
tight end on an offense that can score is always exciting.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's end it with our last guy. Hopefully, he's be a fourth year breakout player. Kyle
Yeah.
Pitts.
He stinks. Sucks.
Again, again, we can say. I mean, I'm not really going to say a ton of this because everything that I could say about everything I said about Drake London can literally apply to Kyle Pitts, right? I mean, coach, the usage, and then quarterback play, all that we just talked about on Drake London earlier is the same excuse I can throw out there for Kyle Pitts. I think he's extremely talented. I know there was like a video going out last year that showed like if Kyle Pitts had a good quarterback and he was like wide open on like a bunch of different routes with a ton of opportunity to get more rack with it. So I don't think talent's an issue. I think it's just usage and quarterback play. So I expect him to have his best season so far in 2024. I think the coaching staff and it will utilize him properly. So I'm going to throw my eggs one more time in the Kyle Pitts basket and hope I'm right. Sully, you joining me?
If I had any shares of Kyle Pitts, and I don't anymore, I would be selling him hard and fast. I think so.
Did I take your last one?
I had 2, and I traded 1 to you, and I traded 1 straight up for Kelsey.
Okay.
But I'll say this: I would be selling him hard, and I would be selling him fast. And nobody likes Kyle Pitts more than I do. But the biggest difference between
after you just said all that, yeah, there are people that like.
There's definitely people now.
I love him like he's a kid.
I like him more than you now.
Well, but I'm not selling him because I don't like him. I'm selling him because other people like him as well. Okay. But the point that I think I'm trying to make here, if I can get there, is the difference between Drake London and Kyle Pitts more than anything, in my opinion, is health. And I think Kyle Pitts' knee is a big, big deal. And he hurt it in his second season. He suffered with it all last season. And I'm just worried that he's a Juju Smith-Schuster type tight end now, and that he has just lost everything that he had that made him so attractive. He had a 1,000-yard season as a rookie. He had over 100 targets as a rookie. He caught 1 touchdown. And if he'd have caught 5, 6, like a normal tight end would on that volume, even 10, I'd have maybe would have been right for about 5 minutes. But I just think he's dangerously close to becoming not irrelevant, but pedestrian. So I love him like a brother, but I'm looking to get out if I had any skin left in the game.
I honestly don't know where I'm at with Kyle Pitts. I really don't. I don't know if it's he's not as good as we thought. I don't know if it's coaching. I don't know if it's quarterback play. All those questions are still there, though, for me, because we don't know about this coaching staff. We don't know who their quarterback's going to be. Don't know if he's as good as we thought he was going to be. So none of those have been answered yet. Right now, if the public thinks that all the changes that have been made are going to propel him to that breakout, because I would say he broke out his rookie year with 1,000 yards as a tight end. But if we're talking, him going up to 1,200 yards or whatever it is, or more touchdowns, whatever, I would question that pretty heavily, because all the questions I think we had are still there. So I like Kyle Pitts. I thought he was more talented. Again, me and Sully had our debates, but it was never, for me, it was never about Kyle Pitts' talent. It was purely about fantasy value, and where you're rarely ever going to get a tight end that has top 5 startup value in fantasy.
You won't for me again.
And Jamar Chase in that class, I thought could be the number 1. And you know what? He's probably number 2, number 3 for most and non-super flex. But that was my big reason, was just because the value upside in fantasy, you're literally looking it in the eye and saying, I'm giving that up. So I hope he does. And especially if the Bears do make a trade and bring him in, I hope he does. But I really don't know right now. And I don't know where the public is on him. And if they are real high that he's going to bounce back or break out or whatever you want to call it, then I'm probably on board with Sully with him being a sell. If most people think that they're not as warm on him, they're trying to get something out of him before it goes worse, then I might be on the buy side. Kyle Pitts is the one I can't figure out right now.
I'll probably do
Hard not
both.
to.
I'll probably try to add a couple, and I don't have any left to sell, but I'll probably try to add one or two. But I'm not paying
Well,
much for it.
it's still both. You already did the one side, so now it's just the second side coming in. So, did you have anything to add there, Bryce?
No. I think I agree with you. Like, it's kind of fun. We see it right here, and I think that he is a hard guy to value right now. Like, I'm kind of high on him, so he's obviously off of him. You don't know, so and I think that's going to be a good representation of the public too.
He's still going to be a top 10 to 12 tight end dynasty rankings for me. I don't know how he can't
Yeah.
be. So,
Yeah.
like, I'm not, it's not Bryce Young and Quentin Johnston level of I'm out.
Right.
I've softened, and
Right.
I'm fully comfortable with saying that having Kyle Pitts ahead of Jamar Chase was the wrong call. I still think having him ahead of Najee Harris might have been the right call, but time will tell. I was more into the positional advantage this guy is going to give me in fantasy football, and he's going to be a 1,200-yard receiving tight end with 8 to 10 touchdowns a year, being a top 12 wide receiver playing tight end. That's what I saw from him, and that's why I put him where I put him. It hasn't come to fruition, so I was wrong. It's okay. It'll happen again.
Maybe they'll do it once you sold them all.
And I'd be happy to come back and say, "Look at me, I was right."
don't have any
That's not happening. That's not happening unless Jamar Chase decides he doesn't like football anymore and wants to retire. That's not happening. So,
all right. Well, if you want to watch our bounce back players that we covered on last week, you can watch that right here. And we will be back next week with I don't know what, but it'll be good.